It began with the sound of dripping behind the plaster. In the winter of 2019 in the town of Marrowwick, Maine, population just under 4,000, a couple renovating a long-abandoned Victorian home made a discovery that would unravel nearly a century of carefully buried secrets. What was meant to be a quiet return to simpler living became the epicenter of a state-wide criminal investigation, the reopening of multiple missing persons cases, and the unraveling of one of the most disturbing family histories ever uncovered in New England. At the center of it all was the Durnham family. Marrowwick is the kind of place that appears frozen in time. With thick fog curling off the Abenaki River and rows of steep, roofed homes still bearing the dark patina of old shipyard money, the town holds an uneasy kind of charm. It's the kind of place where people still wave from porches, where everyone knows the names of the original founding families, and where silence is often mistaken for peace. The Durnhams were once among the town's elite. In the early 1900s, Frederick Durnham inherited a modest fortune from his father, who had made his money in logging and rail transport. Frederick built the family's imposing estate at the north end of Weaver Street in 1918. A three-story Queen Anne Victorian with ivy-choked trellises, ornate iron fencing, and hand-carved gables that leered like grimacing faces over the front lawn. Local children referred to it as the Black House, though the shingles were technically a faded slate blue. The family name began to fade from Marrowwick's daily vocabulary sometime around the 1960s. The Durnhams had reportedly moved away, according to the sparse public records still accessible through the Marrowwick Town Archives. The house sat empty for decades, boarded up and slowly decaying, until it was purchased at auction by a couple from Boston, Alice and Jeremy Callahan. The Callahans were in their late 30s, childless, and hoping to escape the city to start a bed and breakfast. We saw it as a passion project, Alice would later tell the Bangor Daily Herald. It was just sitting there, like it was waiting for someone to bring it back. But some things should stay buried. The first sign that something was wrong came from a contractor named Luis Ortega, who had been hired to remove the deteriorating lath and plaster from the upstairs nursery. There was this smell, Ortega said in a deposition later submitted during the state investigation. Like dead animals, but older, drier, hard to explain. And then I noticed the pattern on the walls. It wasn't just water damage. It was something else. Behind the plaster, Ortega uncovered a layer of fabric, old hand-stitched muslin tacked to the inner walls with rusted nails. When peeled back, the cloth revealed faint reddish-brown smears that had soaked through both fabric and wood. Along the baseboards were brittle fragments of what would later be confirmed as human hair. The Callahans contacted the Marrowwick Police Department immediately. Within 48 hours, the house had been sealed off, and a forensic team from the Maine State Police descended upon a 112 Weaver Street. Captain Mara Quince, lead investigator on the case, was the first to recognize the enormity of what they had found. It wasn't just one room, she told reporters in early 2020. It was the entire house. Every single room had evidence of interior alterations, false walls, hollow panels, sealed-off crawl spaces. Someone went to extreme lengths to hide what they were doing inside that house. The Maine Bureau of Investigation would ultimately spend 8 months cataloging the evidence. In total, forensic teams uncovered 13 separate containment sites within the walls and floors of the house. Some held bones, many so degraded by time and vermin that only fragments remained. Others held objects, a porcelain doll with human teeth glued inside its mouth, a bundle of children's clothing wrapped in twine and soaked in an unidentified viscous fluid, a locked iron box filled with teeth. Each one tagged with a name and date, many dating back to the 1920s. More disturbingly, embedded in the basement walls were more than 24 sheets of parchment, preserved in glassine envelopes. They contained handwritten confessions, drawings, and journal entries, most signed with the initials FD or CD, believed to refer to Frederick Durnham and his eldest son, Charles. "I've never seen anything like it in my career," said forensic pathologist Dr. Eliza Kenner, who was brought in to analyze the remains. It wasn't just murder, it was ritualistic, precise. There was a pattern to how the bodies were treated. This wasn't improvisation. This was a system. Historians and local genealogists worked to connect the findings to missing persons records from the surrounding counties. By cross-referencing dental anomalies, old X-rays, and the few surviving police reports from the 1930s and 40s, investigators confirmed at least 6 identities, all local children who had vanished between 1926 and 1951. What followed was a deep dive into the Durnham family history, one that revealed a trail of psychological illness, closed-door settlements, and a pattern of evasive behavior that stretched back generations. The first public record of concern came in 1933, when a neighbor, Mrs. Helen Grover, filed a complaint with the Marrowwick Sheriff's Office. Her statement, preserved in brittle carbon copy, read, "I have seen the boy dragging what looks like a sack through the snow late at night. It screams like a rabbit but sounds like a child. I told Mrs. Durnham and she told me I ought not to gossip." Except that boy was Charles Durnham, then 17 years old. At the time, the complaint was dismissed. No search was made. The sheriff, Samuel Bell, was known to be close friends with Frederick Durnham, and records show that the report was marked, resolved. No action needed. But it wasn't the only one. Over the next 20 years, at least 8 more incidents were recorded involving the Durnham property, ranging from missing pets, strange lights seen in the attic, to the frantic report of a child who ran screaming from the woods behind the estate in 1947. The child, 9-year-old Lydia Keller, told her parents that she had seen little girl with no hands in the trees, wearing a dress that looked painted with rust. Again, no follow-up. For the residents of Merriwick, the Durnhams simply kept to themselves. That was how it was described again and again in interviews conducted during the investigation. They weren't unkind, said Marlene Frey, now 92, one of the last living people to remember the Durnhams firsthand. But there was something off. The house always felt sick, like it had a fever. And there were rules. You didn't ask to go inside, and you didn't talk about the music. When pressed, Frey elaborated that several neighbors recalled hearing strange, rhythmic sounds at night, what some believed to be piano practice, and others described as chanting. Whatever it was, it always stopped before dawn. The journals found in the basement revealed another layer entirely, written in a looping, ornate hand that grew increasingly erratic over time. The entries described binding rituals, cleansings, and something referred to only as the harvest. One entry dated October 3, 1941, reads, "She must not leave the house. The air takes from her. The voices call through the chimney. Charles understands now. He knows what must be fed," said another, dated July 12, 1950. "The girl won't stop crying. She knows I see the face behind her eyes. Clara says we are almost done, but she always says that. I don't think she understands the promise." Clara Durnham, Frederick's wife, was long assumed to have died in 1945, based on her obituary in the Merriwick Register, but a state coroner now believes her remains were among those discovered beneath the floorboards of the master bedroom. The obituary, as it turns out, was forged. It was printed without a death certificate, and the attending physician listed, Dr. Malcolm Yarrow, had no record of practicing medicine in the state of Maine. He did, however, appear once in a court case in 1939 in a child custody dispute in nearby Waldron County. In that case, he testified on behalf of a family accused of occult influence and undue religious confinement. That family's name, also Durnham. The trail led investigators to a horrifying hypothesis. The Durnhams were part of a generational cult-like belief system, one that fixated on sacrifice, purity, and what Frederick's writings referred to as the preservation of lineage through stillness. When the Durnhams left Merriwick in the 1960s, it's now believed they did not move at all. They simply vanished from public life. Official records stop in 1964. The last known utility bill was paid in 1965, and then in silence, until the Callahans, until the Walls gave up their secrets. But what remained to be discovered, what still lay hidden beneath the house and the town's collective memory, was far more disturbing than anyone imagined. The first breakthrough in uncovering the full scope of the Durnham legacy came not from a document, but from a survivor. Her name was Lillian Gray. She came forward in March of 2020 after reading a local paper's brief article about the findings at 112 Weaver Street. She was 76 years old, living in a nursing home in Thomaston, nearly 2 hours south of Merriwick. Her mind, though weathered by age, was shockingly sharp. "I didn't know them as the Durnhams," she told investigators during a recorded interview. "To me, they were the keepers. That's what the children called them." Lillian had spent nearly 5 years in what she described as the underground, a term she used to refer to a sealed sub-basement level beneath the Durnham house, an area that law enforcement had not yet discovered. "There's a second door," she said, "behind the cold chute. It's wood, painted like the walls, but the knob's made of bone. You don't see it unless you know." Guided by her memory and floor plan sketches she drew by hand, forensic teams reopened the case site in the far southwest corner of the basement, behind a crumbling storage room lined with old sacks of lime. They found it a false panel, sealed at the edges with beeswax and something that lab testing would later confirm as dried blood. Behind the panel was a narrow passage. Crawling through it led investigators to a chamber beneath the foundation, roughly 20 by 20 feet. The ceiling was low, the floor dirt-packed and sunken in places. The smell was overpowering. In the center of the room sat a stone slab stained black. Rusted hooks hung from the ceiling on iron chains, and along the far wall was a series of small cages, no larger than kitchen cabinets. They were child-sized. "I remember the sounds," Lillian said during a second interview. "It wasn't screaming all the time, just the breathing, shallow, like animals. We weren't supposed to talk unless it was prayer." What she recounted during those interviews sent shockwaves through the investigative team. She had been abducted in 1953 while playing along the Abenaki River near the ruins of an old mill. A man she described as clean, with a soft voice, had offered her a red ribbon. When she woke up, she was in the dark. According to her account, she was held until 1958, fed only broth and stale bread, punished for speaking, and forced to participate in what she called the naming. The naming was when they'd bring in the new one, she said. We had to watch while they asked it questions. Always the same ones. What is your number? What do you remember? Who is your blood? If it answered wrong, it didn't stay. Lillian's story was initially met with skepticism. No missing person report existed under her name, but a deeper investigation revealed that her birth name was not Lillian Gray, it was Margaret Cleary. She had been reported missing on June 3, 1953, from a town called Mayhurst, nearly 60 miles west of Merriwick. Her parents died in a house fire the following year. It was believed she had perished with them. But the scars on her body, old ligature marks on her ankles and wrists, a partially healed skull fracture, and dental anomalies consistent with the other remains found at the house, corroborated her claims. She was the first confirmed living victim of the Durnham house. In the weeks following Lillian's disclosures, excavation of the sub-basement began in earnest. Ground-penetrating radar revealed 3 more chambers beneath the main structure. These had no access points from within the house and were believed to have been used for long-term confinement. Inside these chambers, forensic teams recovered 117 artifacts, many of them made from bone, hair, and resin, small effigies, fetishes. One chamber contained a mural, painted in some form of organic pigment. It depicted a tree with no leaves, ringed by faceless children with hollow eyes. But perhaps the most disturbing find was a book. Bound in deteriorated leather, the book had no title. Its pages, brittle and uneven, appeared to be hand-pressed vellum. Its language, a mix of archaic Latin, sigils, and what may have been a derivative of Enochian script, remained undeciphered. Experts from Dartmouth and the University of Toronto were consulted. One professor of medieval texts, Dr. Lise Vernot, called it a hybrid manual of ritualistic practice and genealogical doctrine. She noted similarities to the infamous Codex Seraphinianus, but pointed out that many of the symbols in the Durnham book had no known precedent. More chillingly, scattered throughout the pages were fragments of what appeared to be family lineage charts. One name appeared repeatedly, Elspeth Durnham B. 1892. Elspeth had not appeared in any prior research. Her name was not on the family tree preserved in Merriwick's Historical Society records, nor did she appear in census data. But deep within the town's courthouse archives, buried in a ledger mislabeled under property disputes, an entry from 1910 was found: transfer of deed. Elm Hollow Cemetery, Plot B3 to Elspeth Durnham, age 18, no parents listed. Custodian Frederick Durnham. A visit to Elm Hollow Cemetery revealed the plot, overgrown, its marker eroded, but under the soil ground radar indicated something strange. Not a coffin, not a vault, but a narrow shaft descending vertically more than 15 feet. Inside was a capsule of thick iron, welded shut. It took a week for hazmat teams to extract it safely. What they found inside shook even the most seasoned members of the team. A chair, straps, scratch marks on the walls, and a long braid of human hair pinned to the interior with a rusted brooch. DNA testing later confirmed it matched several of the remains found in the Durnham house. The theory: Elspeth Durnham had been used as some sort of conduit, perhaps even deified by the family across generations. Whether she lived in that capsule or died within it remained unclear. Her name appeared in other places too, scribbled on the backs of old invoices, burned into the base of a wooden idol discovered in the crawlspace, even tattooed, crudely, on the back of a child-sized mannequin head discovered in the attic. She had become myth, a core tenet of the family's twisted beliefs. A search through Frederick Durnham's journals revealed increasing references to her womb, sealed in silence, and Elspeth's vow of stillness. One entry, dated June 1, 1932, stated the girl in the wall is not Elspeth, but she listens. Through her breath we remember. Through her eyes we are unmade. By the fall of 2020, the investigation had become the largest in the state's history. Several lawsuits were filed against the state for negligence, citing the town's repeated failure to investigate the Durnham property. The Merriwick Historical Society was accused of destroying evidence related to the family, though no formal charges were brought. And then, one final discovery changed the story forever. While clearing the wooded lot behind the Durnham estate, a forestry team uncovered an old well, long dry and choked with debris. At the bottom of the shaft, buried beneath decades of soil, were dozens of small, cloth-bound packages. Each was marked with a date and a symbol, a circle divided by a vertical line. Inside each package was a set of baby clothes. Some were soaked in blood, others wrapped around tiny skeletal remains. The dates ranged from 1925 to 1994. There had been no Durnhams living in the house since the mid-60s, which begged a terrifying question: who had continued the ritual, and where were they now? The final chapter of the investigation would focus not on the past, but the present. On those who had lived quietly in the shadows of the Durnham name. On those who believed the line of stillness had not ended, only gone dormant. The renewed investigation turned its focus outward, beyond the decaying walls of 112 Weaver Street and into the community that had harbored the Durnham legacy in silence for nearly a century. Marrowwick had always been a town that preferred whispers over headlines, tradition over confrontation. But as federal investigators and national media descended in the wake of the revelations, it became clear that the rot had never been contained to the house alone. It had seeped into the town's institutions. Through subpoenaed documents, back-channel testimonies, and anonymous tips, the task force uncovered what appeared to be a loosely connected network of individuals tied to the Durnham family line, or more precisely, tied to its ideology. At the center of this network was a man named William Alton. He was 64, a retired surveyor, lifelong Marrowwick resident, and, by all appearances, a benign eccentric. He lived alone in a trailer just north of the Abenaki River and had a reputation for carving elaborate walking sticks from driftwood and selling them at the local farmers' market. But Alton was also a genealogist, and in the basement of his property, authorities discovered a meticulous archive of family histories, charts, birth certificates, baptismal records, even DNA test results, tracking dozens of bloodlines connected to the Durnhams. There were names on the walls, written in charcoal, each one marked either still or broke. When questioned, Alton remained calm. He insisted he had done nothing illegal. He referred to his collection as the quiet ledger. I wasn't harming anyone, he told agents. I was keeping the balance, watching the names, waiting for the pattern to shift. When asked to explain what he meant by that, he smiled faintly and replied, "The pattern speaks through silence. The more it tightens, the closer the vessel comes." He was arrested on charges of obstruction of justice and unlawful possession of human remains. Several preserved fetal specimens were found in jars within his home, some dated as recently as 2011. But William Alton, it turned out, was not working alone. Further investigations led to the uncovering of a hidden room in the Marrowwick Public Library, accessible only through a panel behind the history section. Inside were several crates of Durnham family documents, many of them previously believed destroyed. The key had been in the possession of Library Director Meredith Haynes, a 58-year-old woman who had served on the town's Cultural Preservation Board for over 2 decades. When confronted, Haynes admitted to curating the materials on behalf of what she called the Continuance Society. She described the group as a silent order of preservationists, dedicated to protecting the line, maintaining the watch, and safeguarding the threshold. A search of her home turned up more disturbing items. Ritual diagrams, vials of dried blood labeled with initials, and a notebook written in a ciphered dialect matching the language found in the Durnham family's ritual book. The Continuance Society, it seemed, had chapters in 4 neighboring counties. What they believed, or rather, what they feared, was that the discovery of the Durnham house would trigger a cycle known in their writings as the return of the vessel. In recovered documents, the vessel is described as she who remembers, a descendant born once every 3rd generation, bearing what they called the mark of silence, a birth defect or anomaly believed to signal spiritual alignment with Elspeth Durnham. One of the society's older manifestos explained, "When the blood grows thin, the vessel awakens. She will cry without sound, weep without tears. She shall unseal the threshold by remembering what was promised." But these writings were originally dismissed as cult ramblings until a series of disappearances came to light. Between 1994 and 2019, 5 girls between the ages of 6 and 10 had gone missing across rural Maine. Each case was unsolved. No witnesses, no ransom, no bodies. When their families were interviewed again in light of the Durnham investigation, a chilling connection emerged. Each of the girls had a documented history of congenital aphonia, or the inability to speak. They were silent. The implications were immediate and horrific. The final damning piece of evidence came from a tip submitted anonymously to the FBI field office in Augusta. It consisted of a photograph, black and white, grainy, printed on aged photo paper. It showed 4 individuals, standing outside what appeared to be a small chapel made of stone. At the center was a young girl, pale, dressed in a ceremonial gown. She was not smiling. Her mouth was sewn shut. A note scrawled on the back read simply, 93 years. The house remembers. The hollow sleeps. The chapel in the photo was identified as an abandoned religious retreat site known as St. Ruarid's Hollow, located in the remote forests near the Canada border. It had burned down in 1987 under mysterious circumstances, but satellite imagery revealed a hidden outbuilding roughly 400 yards east of the main ruins. A joint task force was deployed. They found the site just before dawn on October 14, 2020. Inside were signs of recent habitation. Animal bones, a makeshift altar, and, in the far end of the building, a bricked-over doorway. Behind it was a sealed room. Inside that room, chained to the floor, was a girl. She was approximately 9 years old, malnourished, non-verbal, and completely mute. Her mouth had not been sewn, but her tongue had been surgically removed. A medallion hung around her neck. It bore the same circle and line symbol found in the well packages behind the Durnham house. The girl's identity remains protected. She has been placed in federal custody under an anonymous guardianship, and her recovery has been described as slow but remarkable. But blood testing revealed something extraordinary. She was a direct descendant of the Durnham bloodline, a great-great-granddaughter of Charles Durnham, and her existence changed everything. It proved that the Durnham rituals had not ended in the 1960s. They had simply adapted, becoming nomadic, more secretive, less tied to place and more to belief. The continuance society had not just preserved a history, it had actively curated a legacy of ritual abuse, psychological control, and theological obsession for nearly a century. And for a time, no one had known, or rather, they had chosen not to know. More than 50 people across 5 counties were arrested over the course of the following year. Charges ranged from conspiracy and evidence tampering to child endangerment and accessory to kidnapping. But even as the courts began to process the enormity of the crimes, one chilling truth remained. Many of those arrested were in positions of trust: teachers, archivists, midwives, therapists, even clergy. The ideology had metastasized into the very fabric of the region, quiet, precise, and patient, just like the house that hid its secrets in the walls. As 2021 came to a close, authorities prepared for the final phase of the investigation, a sweeping search of properties connected to anyone with traceable links to the Durnham bloodline. But what they found in the last location, what they uncovered in the ruins of a farmhouse once owned by the second cousin of Clara Durnham, would lead to one final twist, because buried in that basement beneath a false floorboard was a coffin, a child's coffin. Inside it was nothing, only a single word carved into the wood: returned. The coffin's message, returned, landed like a curse. It was the last, most enigmatic clue in a case already steeped in horror, and it cast a long shadow over everything the task force had uncovered. For investigators and townspeople alike, it raised the most terrifying question yet: if the vessel had been found, and if she was now safe, who or what had been returned? The Durnham investigation officially closed in late 2022. Over 70 individuals were convicted in connection with the Continuance Society, including 2 former state employees and 3 members of the local clergy. Dozens of victims were identified through genetic tracing and newly digitized public records, many of whom had never even been reported missing. The state of Maine established the Merriwick Reconciliation Fund, allocating the $28 million to support long-term psychological care and reparation for the victims and their descendants. Federal policy changes followed, focusing on better archival transparency, enhanced inter-county cooperation on missing persons cases, and mandatory digitization of historical police reports. But no amount of legal reckoning could explain what had truly occurred. For those involved in the investigation, the deeper they looked, the more they felt the Durnham family had left behind more than trauma. There was a pattern to it all: rituals that coincided with lunar cycles, genealogical records that seemed artificially extended, and references in the family's journals to something called the stillborn hour. Dr. Elizabeth Harrow, a folklorist at Bowdoin College, was brought in during the final months of the investigation to analyze the symbolic and linguistic elements of the Durnham texts. "What struck me," she said during a panel discussion in 2023, "was the overwhelming emphasis on containment, not just of people, but of memory. Their entire system was built on keeping something inside, sealed by silence, by omission. The house was a vault. But a vault isn't built just to protect others. It's built to hold something dangerous within." It was Harrow who unearthed a forgotten term found repeatedly across the Durnham records: sarkith. Though not found in any known lexicon, it appeared in proximity to entries describing childbirth, sacrifice, and silence. In one annotated diagram of the family's ritual space, sarkith was drawn beneath the foundation of the house, surrounded by symbols for isolation, sleep, and birth. "I don't think it's a person," Harrow said. "I think it's a concept, or perhaps a force. Something the Durnhams believed had been bound beneath their home. Something that required generations of control and ritual to remain asleep." When pressed further, she offered a chilling hypothesis. What if the vessel was never meant to bring it back, but to keep it down? By early 2024, many in Merriwick hoped to forget. The Durnham estate was purchased by the state and slated for demolition. Plans were made for a memorial park, with a granite monument to the victims and a plaque engraved with the names of those identified. But in March, just 2 months before demolition was scheduled to begin, a final incident occurred. A crew working to stabilize the southeast wing of the house uncovered a crawl space previously overlooked. Inside was a narrow shaft descending 15 feet into the earth. At the bottom was a sealed wooden crate, bound in iron wire and stamped with a day's 1873s. The crate was sent unopened to a secure forensic lab in Augusta. On April 9th, during the routine imaging process, power was lost in the building for 6 minutes. No external cause was ever found. The generator failed. Backups failed. When systems came back online, the imaging room was empty. The crate was gone. Security footage for that time frame showed nothing. No movement. No breach. Only one camera, positioned outside the building, captured something unusual, a flicker of light at 3:47 a.m. The light took the shape of a vertical line, then darkness. The investigation into the disappearance was inconclusive. There were no signs of theft, no footprints, no forced entry. Internal documents from the Bureau of Occult and Anomalous Phenomena, a newly formed subdivision of Homeland Security, simply listed the object as unrecoverable. But something had shifted in the town. In the summer of 2024, residents of Merriwick began reporting strange phenomena. At first, it was small tools vanishing from sheds, dead birds found arranged in circles along the riverbank, a sound like distant weeping heard in the early hours before sunrise. Then came the fog. It was thicker than usual. Lingering, it clung to the streets and fields well into midday. Local meteorologists could offer no clear explanation. Livestock in surrounding counties began to exhibit erratic behavior, restlessness, unexplained aggression, refusal to breed. And then, in July, a child went missing. 7-year-old Joshua Elwell was last seen playing near the remains of the Durnham estate. His parents had left him briefly to attend to a delivery. When they returned, he was gone. In his place was a red ribbon pinned to the fence post, exactly like the one Lillian Gray had once described. The case remains open. No evidence has been found, but something in the air has changed. Locals speak in hushed voices again. A new kind of silence, not the protective silence of old secrets, but the dread silence that comes when people are afraid the past didn't die. That maybe, after all these years, the house didn't hide something. Maybe it held it, and now it's loose. The final word on the Durnham case appeared in a confidential memo circulated among forensic teams and federal archivists in late 2024. It read, "Seal the records. Mark as folklore where possible." The threshold was opened. We have no means of closing it. The house was not the site. The house was the lock. Pray there isn't another key. This was the macabre history of the Durnhams, a family who didn't just hide secrets in the walls. They built the walls to keep something inside, and now the walls are gone.